Chris McKenzie at JTech in the Diesel Automotive Technology program. Today we're going to be setting up a gel test, diagnostic scan computer test. I'm going to walk you through just simply setting it up and explaining everything that we're looking for. First thing you want to do is you want to check your battery voltage. So we've got a voltmeter and we're going to set it to voltage, and when it turns on it's going to do its self-test and self-explanatory. And normally what you want to do is disconnect every battery and test them individually, and with them being disconnected you'll get a more accurate reading of the individual battery itself. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to leave everything connected and walk you through the steps of testing it. Alright, and self-explanatory, red to red, black to black. And what we're looking for on each battery, you want 12.6 volts or higher to indicate that it's a good battery. It's bouncing around a little. And normally, before you go just testing your battery, it's always a good idea to clean up your battery connections, because then you can get a better connection and a more accurate reading. With everything on right now, we're looking at about 12.5 volts. Again, about 12.5. And with these truck systems, you also want to, with it being connected, you want to do what's called a parallel voltage test. And all you're doing is you're going from one battery in to the other. And what that is doing is testing voltage across all the batteries as a whole. And they're all reading right around 12.4, 12.5, bouncing around a little. But you're going to have a little bit of a parasitic draw. Like I said, you'd want to realistically clean up your batteries and your battery terminals, because then that'll give you a better reading. Once you test your batteries to make sure you have good voltage at your batteries, it's always a good idea to do a simple walk around. Make sure you don't have any loose connections or any sensors that are falling off. Quick, simple walk around. Make sure nothing's busted, broken, loose, hanging free, swinging. And for most of the sensors, if they're hanging freely, then it's going to be obvious that you're troubled. You're never going to really know what your trouble is until you hook up and you scan it, and it gives you your fault code. And then when it gives you your fault code, you can do further troubleshooting from there. And then with your ECM, it's always important that it's properly snug and connected, because if your ECM's not connected properly, then the test is not going to read your ECU and you're never going to get your fault codes. Alright, so for the most part, I'm pretty confident that everything's properly hooked up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring our computer over. So the next thing we need to do is on these trucks, normally you're going to have either a 9-pin or a 6-pin, so you need to check your connector to determine which connector you need. And I don't know if you can get a good shot, but this is the 9-pin. The 6-pin obviously is going to have fewer holes, so we're going to go in our drawer, pull out our 9-pin connector, and so we can properly connect up our computer. Alright, so like I was saying, you have your 6-pin and your 9-pin, and as you can see, your 6-pin has way fewer, and we've already determined it's a 9-pin. Then when hooking the this up, you want to make sure it's properly aligned. Alright, so now that that's properly aligned, we're going to turn our computer on. While we're waiting for the computer to boot up, you always want to make sure you turn your ignition to the on position. If you don't turn it to the on position, your ECU is not going to have power and you'll never be able to read your codes. Alright, so pretty simple. Once you turn it to the on position, your dash is going to light up, your brakes are going to conduct a choking test, and you know you're going to have power going. Alright. And the system that we're going to be using today on this computer is the Bosch Test, and all we're going to do is we're simply hooking it up, making sure that it reads with the ECU, and this way, once we verify that it's reading with the ECU, we'll be able to read any codes that's coming up with the engine. Alright, so on our computer, the system is ESI Chronic. And while this is loading up, remember when you're hooking into your truck's going to have more than one ECU, and when you're looking for specifically the engine, you want to make sure you go into the engine so you're getting the codes for that ECU versus just random, because your brake system's also going to have an ECU that's going to give fault codes of its own, and if you click under the wrong one, then you're not going to get the... Alright, so once we get loaded in, we know we're using the 9-pin connector, so we're going to connect and scan. And what this is doing is what's called a roll call, and it's establishing a connection from our computer to our ECU, and it's just communicating with it, making sure everything's properly connected. Alright, obtained VIN shows wrong format. Would you like to manually input in order to call the associated details? Alright, so what this is saying, it was unable to automatically connect. So we'll click OK, and this gives us an option to manually type in the VIN. I've already collected the VIN for this vehicle, but on most trucks, it's going to be somewhere located in the door, and for this truck, it's located here in the panel.
I know you.
You're gonna have to pause it. Alright, so I've already written down the VIN, or the vehicle identification number, and so all we're gonna do is manually enter it in. Continue. Alright, and as I mentioned earlier, you've got an ECU for your brake system and one for your engine system. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure you go under your engine. Continue. Alright, so once we get to this screen, because all we're doing is simply reading faults to see if there's any faults on this truck, we're going to click read faults. and it's reading the ECU memory. Remember when I said you always want to make sure your connections are good and your key is in the on position, or else you'll never have power to establish communication. Alright, and so this gives us our fault code. That is your fault code identifier, and that's just a description. And over here under status it says that it's an active fault, and because it's active fault it means it's a current ongoing issue at the moment, and so you could do further troubleshooting and to try and diagnose what the problem is from here. I'm Chris McKenzie here at JTech in the Diesel Technology program. Today I'm going to be showing you how to connect the computer scan diagnostic system, pull up a fault code, and identify the problem and correct it. The first thing you always want to do is make sure your batteries have proper voltage, because that could be a fault in its own. So we're going to take our voltmeter, turn it to volts, and we're going to go through and we're going to test the batteries individually. And because they're still hooked up, we are going to go ahead and test the parallel. Alright, so essentially what you're looking for with testing voltage on the battery is you're looking for 12.6 volts to determine you have good battery juice. Next thing you want to do, I'm just going to do a brief walk around, make sure none of my sensors or my wiring harnesses are falling off or frayed or broken, to make sure that's not going to be an issue in itself. It doesn't have to be too in-depth, you just quick walk around. Like I said, make sure nothing's hanging off. Nothing's broken, busted, or missing. Because if you have a disconnected sensor or a broken sensor, that could just simply be the problem itself. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is determine if it's a 6-pin or a 9-pin. And here on our connector, it's a 9-pin, and we've already got the 9-pin connector out. So we're going to bring our computer over. Align our pins. And then we're simply going to pull up our program. Alright, so we know our ignition is on because we can hear the beeping for the low pressure. And you always want to make sure your ignition is on so your ECU has power to talk to your computer diagnostics. And it's a 9-pin, so we're going to connect and scan vehicle. Alright, so we're going to have to manually input our VIN, and your VIN, they're normally located right here inside your door. I've already taken the liberty to go ahead and write it down to make it easy. Alright, so today we're looking for the engine codes, and as you can see we have brakes and engines, so we want to make sure we're on brakes to read the ECU for the brakes and not the ECU for the ECU for the engine, not the ECU for the brakes. Alright, so we're going to read our faults. Alright, so we have an active fault, intake air cooler, outlet temperature. Alright, so the first thing that I'm going to do is just walk over to make sure that sensor is properly connected. Because as I mentioned earlier, this could be something as simple as your connector just rattled loose, or maybe your wire rattled out. So we're going to walk over here, and it's an air intake, so we know it's going to be over by the turbos coming off the air intake. So the air intake starts there, and we're just going to simply trace it out. That one's, oh, look at that. I didn't even touch it and it came right off. So essentially all you're going to have to do, reconnect it, and your trouble code should go away.